Welcome to the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast, the space where research is meeting the real world. I'm your host, Dr. Dion Stevens, and today we're diving into a conversation that's as rich, nuanced, and layered as the topic itself. Good Sex by Dr. Candace Hargens. Sexuality is so often framed in narrow terms, simple, transactional, and sometimes even shameful. But Dr. Hargens challenges this approach in her groundbreaking new book, Good Sex, by offering a refreshing perspective of thinking about sex as food. Think about it. Sex is like a great meal. It's full of ingredients, layers, flavors, and variety. Dr. Candace Nicole Hargens is an award-winning associate professor at Emory University's Rollins School of Public Health, where she studies sexual wellness and liberation. With over 70 published articles, Dr. Hargens has made substantial contributions to the field, positioning herself as a leading authority in her discipline. Her innovative work has been widely recognized and featured in major podcasts and publications such as the Huffington Post, Essence Magazine, Wall Street Journal, Women's Health, Blativity, Cosmopolitan, and the New York Times. And don't forget her debut book, Good Sex, that was just published by Row House this past February. It's great to get to sit and talk with you about this, and I enjoy talking with you under other circumstances, but it's especially exciting to talk about your book, Good Sex. And congratulations on getting it out. And I know this is one piece of your larger research identity, but maybe you could start off by telling us what inspired you to actually write Good Sex.
Yeah, I wrote the book that I wanted and needed. And so I wanted this book because I love reading sex research and books about sex that kind of translate some of the research into something that everybody can understand. And what I noticed in them is that none of the authors looked or sounded like me. Now, I could understand everything that was going on and apply it to my life in ways that worked for me. But there were so many pieces missing that were context specific, culture specific. And I was like, a Black woman's voice would be really valuable in this space. And so when I wrote Good Sex, I was like, I want to sound like an academic Black woman, like a Black academic, somebody who knows her stuff and is very much Black and woman. And that comes across. And so I wrote it because I wanted to write it, but also I needed it because during the time that I was writing it, I was pregnant and then nursing and had just come from a really traumatic near-death experience with my reproductive health. And so my sex life was waxing and waning as it does. And I was like, there are certain things that I know that I just need to make plain in here so that I also can practice them or be reminded.
There's a lot to unpack in terms of what you said there, in terms of maternal health, reproductive health, personal stressors that are going on. And I think that's really important to think about when we talk about sex. But maybe you can talk about why it's important to define good sex, especially even for your own personalized definition.
Yes. So good sex is sex that is good to and good for everybody involved. And how we operationalize good is based on what works well for you. As long as consent is the foundation of it, because it's not sex if it's not consensual, your ingredients to good sex may be different than your partner's or your previous self, 5-year ago self. And so having some ability to evolve in your definition of good sex is kind of built into it. Understanding that everybody doesn't have to be the same and that it shouldn't be defined the same is core to it. But is it good to and good for you? And I think that's the baseline.
That's an interesting definition by centering yourself. And it seems a lot of times historically, we have all these other messages and things influencing us. Can you maybe discuss what you found in your research around the noise that might be blocking us from having good sex?
Yeah, so I call them cultural recipes and relationship recipes. And I use the metaphor of food because I feel like everybody gets like what is delicious and what is not delicious.
Right.
So the cultural recipes that many of us get, unfortunately, are unseasoned. And they come from this very narrow window of humanity from like 15th, 16th century wealthy white heterosexual men who had these ideas and they perpetuated them through science and medicine and religion and politics and education about who was worthy of good sex. And it was such a narrow window. But I think because we hear these messages repeated through our family systems, we hear some of that stuff still passed down by relationship partners, that it can really be that we don't even know it's something we can push back against. And so some of those things include, you have to have a certain body type to be worthy of good sex. You have to be a certain income level to be worthy of good sex. You have to be a certain gender or race to be worthy of pleasure. And those pieces, even if we're not consciously thinking about them, kind of can come into the bedroom with us without our critical thoughts.
So you talk about sexual liberation also in the book in terms of a tool for dismantling these harmful power dynamics and creating more equitable experiences. What is sexual liberation?
Sexual liberation is your ability to have access to all the ingredients of good sex and to practice and play with them in ways that feel congruent for you. And so I think most of us know, and we were just having this conversation, that the world is whirling right now, and many of us have been actively engaged in social justice movements and externally facing liberation movements, only to come home to erotic inequity, only to come home to intimate injustice. Many people struggle, Black women in particular, with how we ask for the things we want in sex, how we invite those experiences because we don't want to offend people or hurt people, or we want to just, pretend we don't experience pain because we don't think anybody's going to believe us anyway. And so we've started to embody sexually all of these like superwoman schema scripts and strong Black woman scripts in our sex lives. And then that leads to us having less pleasurable, less fulfilling, less intimate sexual experiences than we are worthy of. And so sexual liberation is us reclaiming that. Not that we have to have sex a certain way, but that we get to create and define it for ourselves in ways that are good to us.
I love the word erotic equity. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's like the outcome of you practicing intimate justice. So intimate justice is you seeing your romantic and sexual relationship as a site for liberation, as a playground for your practice of liberation. And that means that you ask your partner for the things that you want. You practice vulnerability and care and closeness. You receive vulnerability and care and closeness and joy and fun and nastiness and all the things that you might want. So that when you experience something sexually, it's not just one person being the receiver, one person being the giver, and there's this imbalance. The equity doesn't mean that it's tit for tat or transactional, as one might think equality is. It's more so like, am I getting my needs met? Am I getting a fulfilling experience? Is my partner or partners getting that experience? And so if we're both on that plane, then that would be erotic equity.
When you're talking about this, I'm thinking it very much from a gendered perspective. I'm wondering, how do women have to negotiate erotic inequity?
I think that there's a way that we've been socialized to negotiate it that's gendered, raced and gendered, to be frank, right? So I don't think that it's a lack of skill or a lack of worthiness of it, but that when you get socialized in a way, that means that there are sanctions for when you don't operate in that socialization. So if you and your partner, I'm talking about a heterosexual couple in this instance, are socialized in the same messages, the same relationship recipes, it's like, he's supposed to be a protector and a provider, and you're supposed to do this and that. And when you start to operate outside of that, then it's like, this is pushing up against all the status quo stuff. Like, what is happening here? And so erotic equity is like, yes, this is something that should be pushed against because this is not serving both of us in ways that are healthy, in ways that are loving, in ways that are caring. So what do you do with your emotional self when you realize I'm going to push up against these scripts? What do I do with my emotional self when I realize I have to have the courage to push up against these scripts? Yeah.
I love the idea of the ingredients that you talk about, which is like intimacy, fun, pleasure, nastiness, and connection. How do people or couples start to experiment with or incorporate these elements into their sexual lives?
So one thing that I was intentional about doing in the book is giving strategies for each ingredient, because I didn't want to just be theoretical and philosophical about this. People want to know what to do.
Exactly.
And I also didn't want to be toxic positive about it and be like, all you have to do is wave a magic wand. You read this book and ta-da. That's not it. Some of this stuff is long game work. It's like, this is going to be 6 months, 6 years. You need to be in a constant practice of this. And as it ebbs and flows, have compassion with yourself. So in a chapter like intimacy, I give some strategies after I talk about the science of it and share some stories of people who've been through an experience. I give some strategies for people to practice a romance ritual to build intimacy based on the type of intimacy that they like and their partners like. And I also think about it from a variety of identities. So not just cis and heterosexual couples, but people with gender expansive identities, people who are queer, because I didn't want it to come across as if the only people who were worthy of good sex were people who fit this script.
Mm-hmm. I like how you talked about that in terms of intimacy and having a romance ritual. One of the other ones I found that was interesting was the concept of nastiness. We hear this term all the time, and you talk about it very in sort of a liberatory sense. Can you sort of explain what it is and how it challenges the way society stigmatizes certain sexual acts or spaces or individuals as well, too?
Yes. So I chose nasty because it was more relevant to Black culture. And I'm bringing out some Janet Jackson vibes with that, right? Because I love her erotic evolution when she came out with Nasty Boys and she was kind of like in this box of the good girl and you're a nasty boy for talking about sex. And, as we watch The Velvet Rope and other Discipline and all of these other things, we watch Janet evolve as an erotic being. And I think that's an invitation to Black women to consider kinky sex, to consider some of the things that might allow you to play with power dynamics, that might allow you to play with different roles in a fun way, in a way that's sexually healing.
So how can people then begin to unlearn what you call the unseasoned sexual menu? How do you do this, especially when we've been socialized into it?
It's an evergreen practice where if you find that shame or guilt comes up, then you have to deal with whatever that emotion is around it. So maybe you're dealing with your own perfectionism, like, oh, I'm shameful because I didn't live up to this standard of what a good wife should be by not doing X, Y, and Z that I don't want to do. So honoring the fact that that emotion comes from somewhere, from socialization, and that you have compassion for yourself, that I can feel something and not respond to it. And I think that gentle practice, that tender practice is what I want for Black women. There's a hard line. You got to be a baddie. That's not real life for most of us. It's more, we're really grappling with how do I show up in a way that feels authentic to me and not harmful to the people that I care about. And so realizing that our evolution isn't harm on someone, that we can invite people to be on that journey with us. Some people will say yes, and some people will say no.
Right.
And how do we make sense of that? Some of us have fear of loneliness and, scarcity around partners. And so we find ourselves doing things that your work speaks to a lot of these scripts. And, we find ourselves doing things that aren't personally meaningful or pleasurable because we want to hold on to someone. And it's like, how do we release this idea that we're unworthy if we're unpartnered? So a lot of that is built into sexual liberation.
I think one of the other strengths of the book is that you talk about intimacy and connection and how they're elements that sort of enhance each other. And it's not, like you said, about being just alone, but how do you build intimacy and connection in sexual relationships?
Mm-hmm. So when I think about connection, I think about your connection with yourself, and I think about intimacy as your connection with someone else. So you have to be connected to your sense of self, sexually self-aware, embodied, attuned to you. And then in that place, you can also make vulnerability and knowing someone, being known by someone, a part of that. And so intimacy, I love Shamira Howard's work. That's what I cite in the intimate chapter. She talks about intellectual intimacy and emotional intimacy, financial, spiritual, sexual, physical. And each of these is a different way of being close to someone. And so you might find that you prioritize one, but that's not the one that does it for you. That's not the way you really want to be known. And so this is just a more expansive way of thinking about how do I want to know and be known by someone? And do I know myself and want to know myself deeper? Having curiosity about each other and yourself is a major part of that process.
That led right into where I want to go is there's the part about yourself, but also knowing about your partner or potential partners. Mm-hmm. So thinking about not just heterosexual context, but people who are queer, differently abled. How do we move towards a more inclusive and global understanding of good sex so that we can negotiate this with different partners as we go forward?
Yeah, I think that people who are most marginalized have the most to show, they've demonstrated already this flexibility and better, clearer understanding of good sex. So I always cite people like Audre Lorde, who was talking about the power and uses of the erotic before I was born, right? Like queer Black women in particular are already and have already been doing this work. A lot of us are catching up and learning. People who are differently abled, who have been doing work around what it means to be sexual when your genitalia don't function, what it means to be sexual as your body's mobility shifts or doesn't exist in ways that people are used to. That is beautiful in good sex because it gives you a better menu. You have more ingredients. And so even though they're dealing with intersectional oppression and people framing their experiences as useless or all kinds of ways that their experiences get framed immoral, I think that they also have, and the science bears this out, some really beautiful sexual experiences and some really thoughtful philosophies around what good sex is that we all can benefit from.
What are the things that surprises you most about Black women when you bring them this idea of good sex and their definitions or perceptions of it?
The thing that has surprised me most in my most recent study is how few Black women masturbated in the last year. That really surprised me. So I wouldn't say less than half. It was maybe 40%, 42%. Don't quote me on that, but it was something in that range had masturbated in the last year, which was surprising to me. And this was 500 Black women. I was surveying them with their romantic partners. And it's such a beautiful, normal human experience and part of your sexual self-knowing and self-making. And so I think I was caught off guard because I thought because they were all adult women who had, been in the world for a while, that it would just be much more common. And so what it suggests to me is that some of us fall into these ideas, and me and Shamika Thorpe and some of our mentees have a paper on this, these ideas about masturbation being sinful or shameful, and you shouldn't do it when you have a partner because a man should be taking care of that. And I'm like, how do we continue to invite Black women to experience their sexual selves in solo sex? Because that's still a beautiful and viable way of having sex.
What about generationally? We see that the next generation has more access to images and ways to present themselves as sexual beings. How do you think that's affecting our perceptions of good sex?
I'm hearing mixed things. I'm curious what you think too, because I'm hearing that the generation coming next is more conservative than perhaps my generation. I'm a millennial, but the people that I mentor seem to be more thoughtful about their sexual experiences, more communicative with partners, which I love that for them. So I'm encouraged by that. When I think about the music of their generation, who I still enjoy, like Cardi B or Meg Thee Stallion or Glorilla, they're like, no, I think this should be something that we both enjoy, or else you're not doing it. Whereas my generation was more so talking about pleasing a partner and being good at sex and not getting or receiving good sex in a lot of ways. So I see some really good growth in that regard, but there's always been sexual Black women. There's always been, blues women before my generation, right? So I think we always have something to build on. It's just how much of it is hidden and how much of it is visible.
Looking forward, what do you want to see for Black women around good sex?
I want Black women to know how worthy we are. worthy of all the good life has to offer. And sex is one of those things. And so I think we mask confidence sometimes, but our daily practices and behaviors suggest that maybe we're not considering ourselves as worthy as we could. And so practicing that, like, am I making this decision from a place of inherent worthiness that won't change regardless of what decision I make? Or am I making it because I'm afraid, because I feel like I will lose someone, or, and as we take those steps, some days you might continue to make the same decisions, but are we trying to bolster our sense of worthiness? And I think we can do this with and for each other, hyping each other up. Like I talk about hot girl science as my way of doing research, and like, am I citing Black women and hyping each other up? I think that's a daily practice too. Like, how do you talk to your homegirl, your sister, your mother, your grandmother, your niece, your daughter about sex? I want us to have those conversations in really liberating ways so that we can understand ourselves as worthy sexually too.
So more broadly, then, what do you hope that readers, not even just Black women, but others who are reading the book, what do you think they're going to take away, or what would you envision them taking away?
I hope they take away that good sex is not a one-size-fits-all menu, and that you don't have to read the book chronologically. It's more of a resource where it's like, you know what I want to work on? Intimacy. I can start there. I want to work on nastiness. I can start there. Each chapter can be a whole thing in and of itself, and that they see themselves in there, that it's not just written for one particular type of person, that it's an invitation for everyone, and that Black women's ways of being and knowing can be theoretical as applied to everyone, as opposed to ways that people have always generalized white ways of knowing. I think that Black ways of knowing can also be valuable in that regard.
You were just listening to Dr. Candice Hargens share insights from her new book, Good Sex. To explore more of what Dr. Hargens' work covers, including ordering her book, her community initiatives, and social media connections, visit this episode page on the Psychology of Black Womanhood website. If you like today's discussion and want to support the podcast, please share it with your family and friends. You can also show your love by following the podcast and leaving a rating or review. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the podcast, so keep your feedback coming in. Send us your comments or topic requests that you'd like to hear more about. Finally, be sure to grab a copy of The Psychology of Black Womanhood, the book that accompanies this podcast, available from your favorite bookseller. We'll see you next time.